I'm about to read a few texts from my phone here. You can try and guess which of these have I sent and which of these have I received. Ready? When I was your age, things were just different. It is what it is. The struggle is real. Simp. Weird flex, but okay. Ready with your guesses? Drum roll, please. Yes, I have both sent and received all of these texts. Am I proud? No, but it is what it is. Now, I'm sure depending on who you are, you might have had different answers for these. I think almost all of us have had similar sentiments towards the younger generation. Sociologists have a term for it. It's called Juvenoia. And if you could let me, I would like to read the definition for you. Juvenoia, discovered in 2011, is described as the exaggerated fear of the effects of social change on youth, which is essentially a way of implying that me, the older generation, is better than you, the younger generation, on dealing with social implications. If we go by this list of all generations documented since the late 1800s, we see a generation titled as the greatest generation. But doesn't then Juvenoia make the lost generation the greater generation than the greatest generation? Well, if yes, then what is the true greatest generation? Well, if we've made it this far across all generations, let's find out. Let's tackle Juvenoia first. Kids these days. All of us have either heard this or use this statement or a variation of it in our lifetimes. But why don't we use friends these days? Why don't we use co-workers these days? Well, it's got something to do with this term called coeval, which for our context basically indicates people having the same age or belonging to the same time period. Kids these days, or on almost all days, can be found in these coeval groups in schools, in colleges. But that's not the same for everybody else. Look around in your workplace. Is everybody exactly your age? I mean, the generation diversity in your workplace is so much more higher than the generational diversity in a school or in a college. It's easier to stereotype people with higher generational concentration. And that's why, even for the next so many years, it is always going to be kids these days. A stereotype that I don't think is going anywhere. A close cousin of stereotypes is expectations. Generational expectations have been in place since the dawn of the society. And it's the mismanagement of these expectations that leads to the now infamous term, generational gap. Boomers these days expect the millennials to be lazy, entitled, and apparently snowflakes. Now, whether or not these expectations will hold true can only be determined by sociologists in the next few years. But what can be determined is whether boomers held on to their expectations. In a study of 2008, it was found that while prior literature states that boomers would be high achievers, they were in fact the least focused in career advancement. In fact, millennials are better than previous generations at education, at promoting women's equality, and have the lowest crime rates among youth. And while some stereotypes like higher marriage age and housing analytics are true, if we consider the balance of probability, Juvenoia is probably as inconsequential as dancing and pointing at thin air. When David Finkelhor coined the term Juvenoia in 2011, he mentioned that perhaps one of the triggers of Juvenoia could be nostalgia. See, the way we remember our past could be helping in exaggeration of the Juvenoia that we experience. But how do we remember our past? In one of my earlier videos, I used this diagram to showcase how our memory works over time and how there's a tremendous loss of detail. I mean, if you consider this scene as part of your memory, it is very likely that you won't remember it as it is. In fact, you will remember it something like this. Perhaps it's not the brightest of ideas to compare past with the present when your past looks like this. In fact, we're terrible at assigning time to things. We are terrible at this time context. Don't believe me? Let's try something. I am going to read a few texts and you can perhaps tell me when was this text actually written. Here's the first one. Conversation is said to be a lost art. Good talk presupposes leisure, both for preparation and enjoyment. The age of leisure is dead and the art of conversation is dying. Ready with your guesses? Drum roll. 1890. You know what? Let's try another one. I see no hope for the future of our people if they are dependent on the frivolous youth of today, for certainly all youth are reckless beyond words. When I was young, we were taught to be discreet, respectful of elders, but the present youth are exceedingly wise, disrespectful, and impatient of restraint. Ready? Ready with your guesses? This was written in the 8th BC. Doing well, are we? Let's try one final one. Remnants of the old social order will disintegrate. Political and economic trust will implode. Real hardship will beset the land with severe distress that could involve questions of class, race, nation, and empire. A sudden spark will catalyze a crisis. This is an excerpt from a book published in 1997 by these two gentlemen. In their book, The Fourth Turning, they propose a theory that history repeats itself in blocks of 80 years. They propose that each of these 80 years could be divided into 4 20-year turnings, or generations as we call it. These turnings are like seasons: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. The first turning is a high, a phase where the society is in agreement with how it wants to go ahead. It usually follows an event of utter distraught, say like the World Wars from the 1940s. It's a period of consolidation, a period of strong institutions. The second turning is an awakening, a period where people have had enough of the social discipline by these institutions and want to address them with social reforms. The idea of individualism is sowed during this phase, and that directly leads us to the third turning, the unraveling. Unraveling builds on this distrust on the institutions. The question of the future is the central idea of this turning, with polarizing views propagating as individualism continues to rise during this phase. The fourth turning, the one in which we happen to be in right now, is aptly called the crisis, an era of unprecedented suffering which in a way bands the society together again to form institutions from scratch and consolidate the society all over again. So no matter who you are, Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, Boomers, in your lifetime it is almost certain that you will go through all of these 4 turnings. With this sort of a big picture parity, is it even right to question which is the greatest generation? I think we're asking the wrong question. I think the question shouldn't be which is the greatest generation. I think the question should be, what's our role? What's the generation role that we have during our history block? Let's figure that out. The book describes 4 archetypes for each of these 20-year turnings. If we consider our history block, the boomer generation will be the prophets, the people who make prophecies about our world, like the authors of this book. They are boomers. People like Steve Jobs, who put computers in your pocket, or Michael Jordan, who almost single-handedly put the sneaker industry in the mainstream. Generation X follow the boomers, and they have the archetype of nomads. This is the generation of our parents, the people who rose from small town and villages and moved into big cities and establishments. These are the people who came from humble beginnings and established themselves in this world, perhaps by sacrificing and leaving behind all they had, like nomads. People like Sachin Tendulkar are nomads. People like Shah Rukh Khan are nomads. My parents are nomads, and perhaps yours are too. This is the generation of the ultimate sacrifice and the search for establishment. The infamous millennials follow the Generation X, and according to this book, the millennials are the heroes of our history block. These are the frontline workers during the pandemic. These are the scientists that conquered the vaccine in just an year. These are the caretakers of the society in the face of this crisis and the initiators of the rebuilding phase. Millennials today are what the heroes of World War II were, but for our history block. Gen Z are the artists. During the last crisis, the phase of the wars, we saw the birth of John Lennon, Elvis Presley, Kishore Kumar, and so many more generational defining artists. Only time will tell what the Generation Z will actually turn out to be, but it's highly likely that we have already been graced by the next big artist of our race. We are at the end of our history blocks. We are in the fourth turning, the crisis phase. And while everything might seem very dark and gloomy right now, it is important to remember, it's important to look back at history and see how the seeds of the next turning, how the seeds of the next high of our lives will be sowed in this phase. It is important to know that for every crisis, there is a reset that is happening. Whether you like it or not, it is what it is. Before I conclude this video, I would like to mention that this theory, as fascinating as it is highly unscientific as it is unfalsifiable. But it's still good practice. It's a good way to put some context as to who we are and what's our role in this society. So maybe it's time that we stop asking what's the greatest generation and rather focus on what's our role in making this human race a little bit better. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. This is the quickest that I have ever recorded any video, to be honest. Like, I have no idea how this happened. It just came out so quickly. That's what she said. Oh, okay. If you're wondering why I'm wearing this, all of this, it's just because that I haven't had the opportunity to wear this outside, and I like this too much to not be wearing it at all. So this is what you get. Take it or leave it. Does it look like I give a fuck? If it does, you should probably get your fucking eyes checked. Did you see the Vsauce? Yeah, that's the video that made me want to make this video. It's the video called Juvenoia, and obviously there's a question mark. Yeah, that's what Vsauce is. Question mark. Hello. 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 That is very psychotic. Is it just me? Okay, I should stop. Bye.